The Lawn Tennis Association has received a fine, but what's happened? Hello, I'm Dominic Walker. Welcome to JMW's Inside Man YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and keep the conversation going in the comments section as well. So the Lawn Tennis Association has received a fine. Stephen Taylor Heath is head of sport here at JMW Solicitors. So, Stephen, what has happened?
Well, in the summer, Wimbledon decreed that any Russian and Belarusian national tennis players would not be allowed to take part in this year's championships. They haven't been supported in that by the ATP, although they were supported by our government. And now the ATP has said that they're in breach of the rules and regulations with regard to them being an ATP sanctioned event, and have fined them accordingly, not only in relation to Wimbledon, but also the warm-up events that the LTA organises that Russian and Belarusian athletes were not allowed to participate in. The LTA have responded and said it appears to them that the ATP have simply treated this as a rule breach and not considered the wider picture. As a lawyer, I would have to say, well, at the end of the day, Wimbledon, whilst it's a major tournament and has a certain amount of autonomy, it is part of the ATP World Tennis Circuit. And as a condition of being part of that circuit, it agrees to abide by the ATP's rules and regulations. And the rules and regulations are quite clear in the code that each tournament has to accept entries based on the ranking of the particular tennis players, not based on their nationality. So they were always going to be an uphill task in trying to argue that they weren't in breach of the rules and regulations of the ATP.
And we hear of sports diplomacy and sport being sort of above politics. But is this a time where politics and sport have got intertwined a little bit?
Well, the government made some capital out of the stance taken by Wimbledon to say this showed solidarity with Ukraine. We have to consider this when we look at the sanctions that were imposed on Roman Abramovich and the sale of Chelsea. That was as a result of government legislation. The government didn't enact any legislation that Wimbledon could rely on to justify the position that it was taking. The government simply supported them. And I have seen commentary that says that next year, perhaps if Wimbledon allow Russian and Belarusian tennis players to take part, then the government might not grant them visas that would allow them to participate in the tournament. And then Wimbledon could turn around and say, well, we're allowing them to play, but the government are not granting them visas to take part. And then the ATP would have a difficult task to decide whether or not it would effectively remove the sanctioning of Wimbledon and the LTA tournaments.
And this doesn't always happen in sport, does it? World Cups, Olympics, that sort of thing.
Yes, well, it's normally a condition of a country hosting a major sporting event like the Olympics or the World Cup, that as part of the bid, they agree to enact local legislation that will ensure that anybody that the tournament organisers wish to participate can take part as easily as possible without the need for visas and the like. So that's what would happen. Again, if you contrast this with Nikita Mazepan, he was a Russian Formula One driver who was sacked by his team. So the argument generally is that Russian sporting teams can't take part in events. So, for example, Russia were banned from the World Cup, but individual Russian and Belarusian athletes should be allowed to take part. As I say, Mazepan is an individual and he was sacked by his team. However, he subsequently appeared on a sanction list on the basis of the connection between his father and Putin. So there is an awful lot of grey areas and potential hypocrisy in some of the decisions that are being taken here. Unfortunately, where you have politics-based decisions in sport, you are going to get that type of situation.
And where there's grey areas, there's lawyers. How can you and the sports team help here at JMW Solicitors? Well,
our sports team are well versed in advising in relation to the rules and regulations of particular governing bodies across several sports, football, rugby league, boxing, and tennis and the like. But one interesting aspect, as I say, I mentioned here, is the possibility of the government invoking their visa rules and regulations with regard to participation of sports people taking part in events in the UK. And we obviously have a specialist immigration team here at JMW that advises sports people in relation to visa applications both here and abroad. and clearly they may need our services if visas aren't going to be granted.
Stephen, thank you for your insight. If you'd like to speak to Stephen and the sports law team here at JMW Solicitors, you can email insideman@jmw.co.uk or call 0161 82 81 999. Please also subscribe to the JMW Inside Man YouTube channel for the latest legal news, hints and tips. I'm Dominic Walker, JMW's Inside Man.